Queen Seraphina Valcoris stood at the great window of her throne room and watched the 3 moons rise over Valoria Prime, her thoughts heavy with the weight of an empire that stretched across 40,000 star systems. And she knew that tonight she would have to make a choice that would shape the fate of billions. The noble houses were circling like predators, and she could feel their hunger for power growing stronger with each passing day, their whispers echoing through the marble halls of her palace like poison spreading through blood. And the message they sent was clear: choose a consort from among us, or face the consequences of your refusal. But Seraphina was no fool, and she understood the trap they had laid before her with perfect clarity. For if she chose a consort from House Malachar, the other houses would rebel, and if she chose from House Dalvor, Malachar would burn half the empire to ashes, and any choice she made would tear her realm apart. Chief Advisor, an ancient Valorian named Theron, who had served 3 generations of her family, approached with slow and careful steps, his silver scales catching the moonlight as he bowed his head in respect. "Your Majesty, the Council awaits your decision," he said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "And what decision would you have me make, old friend?" she asked, turning to face him with eyes that glowed like molten gold in the darkness. Theron hesitated for a moment, then spoke words that would change everything. "There is another option, one that no noble house would expect, one that would give you time to strengthen your position without giving power to any faction." "Speak plainly," Seraphina commanded. "Take a consort from outside the empire," Theron said, "from a species with no political ties to our noble houses, one so unremarkable that no one could claim you favored them over another." Growing interest, and she asked, "Which species do you suggest?" "The humans," Theron replied. "They have only been part of the galactic community for 30 years. They are considered weak and short-lived. They come from a single backwater world, and they have no wealth or influence worth mentioning, making them the perfect choice for a consort who will be nothing more than a political symbol." The Queen laughed at the absurdity of it all. A human consort for the ruler of the greatest empire in the known galaxy. But as she thought more carefully, she began to see the wisdom in the plan. For who could object to a choice that meant nothing at all? "Send a delegation to Earth," she commanded. "Find me a human male who is presentable enough to stand at my side and unremarkable enough to threaten no one, and bring him here before the next council meeting." 3 weeks later, the delegation returned with a man named Marcus Cole. Seraphina studied him from her throne as he walked into the great hall, and she felt a strange mixture of disappointment and curiosity stirring in her chest, for he was neither impressive nor terrible to look upon, just an ordinary human male in his late 30s, with short dark hair and calm gray eyes. He wore simple clothes that her servants had provided, and he moved with a quiet grace that seemed out of place for someone supposedly so unremarkable. And when he stopped before her throne and bowed his head, she noticed that his eyes had already scanned every corner of the room. "Marcus Cole," she said, letting his name roll off her tongue like a test. "Do you understand why you have been brought here?" "I do, Your Majesty," he replied, and his voice was steady and calm, carrying no fear or nervousness. "And you accept this arrangement willingly?" she pressed. "You would become my consort in name, a figurehead with no real power, bound to an alien queen for the rest of your short human life?" Marcus said simply. The nobles gathered in the hall whispered among themselves, some laughing at the pathetic human who had agreed to be a political puppet, others shaking their heads at what they saw as the Queen's desperate move, and Lord Vathor Malachar smiled with cruel satisfaction from his place among the crowd. "Tell me why," Seraphina demanded, genuinely curious despite herself. "Why would any man agree to such a fate?" Marcus met her golden eyes with his gray ones, and for just a moment, she thought she saw something deeper lurking beneath his calm surface, something old and tired and impossibly strong. "I have spent my whole life serving," he said quietly, "and at least this way, I might do some good." The answer surprised her, and she found herself wanting to know more about this strange human who spoke of service and purpose while agreeing to become nothing more than a decorative symbol. But the moment passed, and she pushed her curiosity aside. "Very well," she declared to the assembled court. "Let it be known that I have chosen Marcus Cole of Earth as my royal consort, and any who challenge this decision challenge the throne itself." The days that followed were filled with preparations and ceremonies, and Marcus played his role with perfect obedience, always standing in the right place and saying the right words, never drawing attention to himself or causing any problems. But Serafina found herself watching him more and more as the weeks passed, noticing small things that did not quite fit the image of an unremarkable human, things that made her wonder if there was more to Marcus Cole than anyone suspected. He moved too quietly for someone who had no training, his footsteps making no sound even on the marble floors of the palace, and he always seemed to know where everyone was in a room without looking at them directly. When servants approached from behind, he never startled or showed surprise, as if he had sensed their presence long before they arrived, and his eyes tracked movements with a precision that reminded her of trained predators. One evening, she watched from a balcony as he walked through the garden below, and she saw him stop suddenly in the shadow of a great tree, standing perfectly still for several minutes as a patrol of guards passed nearby without ever noticing him. How had an ordinary human learned to hide in plain sight like that? On his first night in the palace, Serafina authorized her security chief to place hidden surveillance devices in the consort's chambers, standard procedure for any newcomer to the royal household. And she thought nothing more of it until the next morning. Her security chief burst into her private study with a look of shock and confusion on his face, his scales pale with distress. "Your Majesty," he stammered, "the devices we placed in the humans' chambers, all three of them, they have been disabled." Serafina felt a chill run down her spine as she processed this information. For those devices were the most advanced in the Empire, invisible to all known detection methods, hidden in locations that only her most trusted agents knew about. "Disabled how?" she demanded. "Carefully," the security chief replied. "Professionally, as if he found them within minutes of entering his room. And Your Majesty, even our own people did not know where all three were hidden." The Queen dismissed him with a wave of her hand and sat alone in the growing darkness of her study, staring at nothing as questions multiplied in her mind like stars being born in the void of space. Who was Marcus Cole really? What had she brought into the heart of her empire? And why did some small part of her feel not afraid, but strangely excited by the mystery he represented? She did not know the answers yet, but she was determined to find them, even if it meant looking into the shadows where no queen should ever go. 3 months had passed since Marcus Cole became the royal consort, and Queen Serafina found herself growing more fascinated with her human companion with each passing day, despite her best efforts to maintain an appropriate distance. In public, he was everything she had asked for: quiet, respectful, forgettable, standing silently at her side during ceremonies and state dinners like a well-trained shadow, drawing no attention and causing no problems. But in private moments, when they found themselves alone in the corridors of the palace or sharing meals in her personal chambers, she began to see cracks forming in his mask of ordinariness. The first sign was his impossible mastery of her language. Valorian was considered one of the most difficult tongues in the galaxy, with complex tonal patterns and grammar rules that took most species years or even decades to learn properly. Yet Marcus spoke it fluently within 6 weeks of his arrival. Commented on this achievement, he simply shrugged and said, Languages have always come easily to me, Your Majesty. The second sign was his memory, which seemed to border on superhuman. At a diplomatic reception, she watched him greet over 50 ambassadors by name, correctly recalling not only their titles, but also their family connections, political allegiances, and personal preferences, despite having met most of them only once before. "How do you remember all of that?" she asked him later. "Humans are good at patterns," he replied with a faint smile. "We have had a lot of practice surviving." The third sign, and the most unsettling, was his ability to read people with frightening accuracy. During a trade negotiation with the Syndicate of Chains, Marcus leaned close to her ear and whispered, "The one on the left is lying about the shipping costs, and the one in the middle reports directly to Lord Malachar." She had her spies verify his claims later that night, and both proved true. "You must tell me how you know these things," she demanded when they were alone. Marcus looked at her with those calm gray eyes that seemed to hold secrets older than her empire. And he said, "Body language, voice patterns, micro-expressions, the small signs that people cannot hide. Humans learn to read them early, because our survival often depends on knowing who means us harm." His answer made sense, but Seraphina could not shake the feeling that there was something more to Marcus Cole, something dangerous lurking beneath his friendly surface. Meanwhile, Lord Vathor Malachar grew increasingly frustrated with the Queen and her human consort. His plans had stalled since Marcus arrived, and several of his schemes had mysteriously fallen apart before they could bear fruit, and he began to wonder if the human was somehow involved in his misfortunes. The creature must die, he told his closest allies, during a secret meeting in his private estate. His death will humiliate the Queen and prove that her judgment cannot be trusted, and the other houses will finally see that I am the one who should rule this empire. His allies nodded in agreement, and together they set a plan in motion that would shake the foundations of the palace. Malachar hired the Golkari, 3 reptilian assassins who were renowned across the galaxy for never failing a contract. Their scales black as the void between stars, and their claws sharp enough to cut through starship armor. They demanded a fortune in payment, but Malachar paid gladly, for the death of the human consort would be worth any price. The assassins infiltrated the palace during the grand feast of the 3 moons, slipping through the security perimeter like shadows passing through light, their movements invisible to censors and guards alike. They found their target alone in the eastern garden, standing beneath a canopy of silver flowers that glowed softly in the moonlight, seemingly lost in thought and completely unaware of the death that approached. The lead assassin smiled with cruel anticipation and signaled his companions to move in for the kill, their claws extending as they prepared to tear the fragile human apart. What happened next would become legend throughout the galaxy. Marcus moved before the first assassin could strike, spinning with a speed that should have been impossible for his species, his hand catching the descending claw and twisting it backward with a sharp crack. The assassin screamed as his own weapon was turned against him, the claw plunging deep into his throat before he could understand what had happened. The second assassin lunged forward with both arms extended, but Marcus ducked beneath the attack and drove his elbow into the creature's chest with devastating force, shattering ribs and puncturing vital organs. Assassin tried to flee, realizing too late that they had made a terrible mistake, but Marcus was faster, crossing the distance between them in a single heartbeat and striking the back of the creature's neck with surgical precision. 11 seconds after the attack began, all 3 Golkari lay dead at the human's feet. Marcus straightened his formal robes calmly, brushing away a spot of blood that had landed on his sleeve, and when the palace guards finally arrived with weapons drawn, he looked at them with an expression of mild annoyance. You might want to increase the perimeter patrols, he said. Their entry point was the Eastern Service Tunnel. The guards stared in shock at the three most feared killers in the sector, now nothing more than cooling corpses on the garden stones. Word of what had happened spread through the palace like wildfire, and by morning, everyone knew that the Queen's human consort had killed 3 Golkari assassins with his own hands. Bare hands, in less time than it took to draw breath. Seraphina summoned Marcus to their private chambers that night, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement as she waited for answers. He entered without ceremony and stood before her, still wearing the same calm expression he always wore, as if killing 3 legendary assassins was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "You will tell me the truth," she commanded, her voice sharp with authority. "Who are you really, Marcus Cole?" He was silent for a long moment, and she saw something shift behind his eyes, a wall coming down that she had not even known existed. "Are you certain you want to know, Your Majesty?" he asked. "Some truths cannot be unlearned, and some doors, once opened, can never be closed again." "Tell me," she demanded. Marcus took a deep breath and spoke a phrase that made her blood run cold, words that she had only heard whispered in the most classified intelligence briefings about Earth's hidden military programs. "I was a Reaper, Your Majesty," he said. "We do not exist. We never did." Seraphina felt the room spin around her as the implications of his words crashed over her like a wave. For she had heard the rumors about the Reapers, the ghost soldiers of Earth, who were said to be more deadly than entire armies, operatives so secret that their own government denied their existence. "How is this possible?" she whispered. "Why would Earth send a Reaper to be my consort?" Marcus met her gaze with those gray eyes that now seemed to hold the weight of 1,000 battles, and he said, "Perhaps they wanted to protect something valuable, Your Majesty, or perhaps they saw an opportunity that no one else could see." "What opportunity?" she pressed. But Marcus only smiled, a small and mysterious expression that told her nothing and promised everything. Brought into her palace was anything but simple. The game had changed completely, and Seraphina was not sure if she was the player or the piece. Queen Seraphina could not sleep that night, her mind racing with questions about the man she had brought into the heart of her empire. And when the first light of dawn crept through her windows, she summoned her most trusted intelligence officer. "I need everything you can find on a human military program called the Reapers," she commanded, "and I need it now." The officer, a decorated veteran named Commander Lyris, bowed deeply and departed without asking questions, for she knew better than to question the Queen when her voice carried that edge of steel. 3 days later, Lyris returned with a data tablet clutched tightly in her trembling hands, her face pale with shock, and her scales rippling with barely contained emotion. "Your Majesty," she said, "what I found is almost impossible to believe, but I have verified every piece of information through multiple sources." "Tell me," Seraphina commanded. Lyris took a steadying breath and began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper, as if she feared being overheard. "The Reapers were humanity's answer to a hostile galaxy," she explained. "When Earth's leaders realized how dangerous the universe truly was, they did not try to build bigger ships or more powerful weapons. Instead, they chose to build better soldiers." "Better how?" the Queen asked. "The Reaper program took exceptional humans and turned them into something more," Lyris continued. "The training process was brutal beyond imagination, with a fatality rate of 90%. But the survivors emerged as living weapons unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen." She pulled up a series of classified documents on the data tablet, her hands shaking as she scrolled through page after page of redacted information. "They can outthink tactical computers," she said, "outfight entire squads of trained soldiers, and operate alone behind enemy lines for years without support. Infiltration, assassination, psychological warfare, and a dozen other deadly arts." Seraphina felt a chill creep down her spine, as she listened, and she asked, "What did you find about Marcus Cole specifically?" Lyris swallowed hard and said, "That is where the information becomes truly terrifying, Your Majesty." She pulled up a file that was more black redaction marks than readable text, but the fragments that remained painted a picture of nightmares. Marcus Cole was not just a Reaper, Lyris explained. He was Reaper 1, the first success of the program, the template upon which all others were modeled, the most deadly human operative ever created. The Queen stared at the fragmented records with growing horror and fascination as Lyris continued to read. His mission record is almost entirely classified, but here is what we know. 15 years ago, the Kreth hegemony was preparing to invade the Sol system with a fleet of 2,000 warships. Their war council met in secret to finalize their plans, and Marcus Cole infiltrated their command station alone. "What happened?" Seraphina breathed. "He assassinated the entire war council in a single night," Lyris said. 12 of the most heavily guarded military leaders in the hegemony, killed without raising a single alarm, and when the sun rose the next morning, the invasion was cancelled because there was no one left to lead it. The Queen sat in stunned silence as Lyris continued. "After that, he spent 3 years undercover in the Syndicate of Chains, the galaxy's largest criminal organization, and he dismantled their entire human trafficking network from within, freeing over 50,000 slaves, and bringing down crime lords who had operated with impunity for centuries." "He did all of this alone?" Seraphina asked. "He has officially died 7 times, Your Majesty," Lyris replied. 7 times the galaxy believed he was gone, and 7 times he returned to complete missions that everyone thought were impossible. She looked up from the tablet with fear in her eyes. "He is a legend among special operations communities across the galaxy," she said. "A boogeyman that criminals and warlords whisper about in the dark. They call him the Ghost of Earth, the shadow that walks, the last thing you see." Seraphina rose from her throne and walked to the window, staring out at her empire with new understanding. "And humanity just gave him away as a political gift?" she murmured. "No, that makes no sense. They would never waste such an asset." "I believe I understand their reasoning, Your Majesty," Lyris offered. "Earth is still young and weak compared to the older powers of the galaxy. They need allies and protection. So they place their greatest weapon at the heart of the largest empire in known space," Seraphina finished. "A guardian hidden in plain sight, watching over their interests, while the rest of the galaxy laughs at the foolish humans and their meaningless consort." She turned back to Lyris with a smile spreading across her face. "They are not fools at all," she said. "They are brilliant, and now their weapon is my weapon too." That evening, she confronted Marcus in her private garden, the same place where he had killed 3 assassins with his bare hands. "I know who you are," she said. "I know what you are, Reaper 1, the Ghost of Earth, the most dangerous human ever born." Marcus stood perfectly still in the moonlight, his expression unreadable, and he said, "I wondered how long it would take you to find out." "Why did you not tell me from the beginning?" she demanded. "Would you have believed me?" he asked. "Would any of your nobles have accepted a living weapon as their queen's consort, or would they have demanded my execution as a threat to the Empire?" She had to admit that he made a valid point. "So what happens now?" she asked. "What is your real mission here? And do not lie to me. I have had enough of deception." Marcus was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "When I agreed to come here, my mission was simple: protect Earth's interests by watching over the Valorian Empire. But something changed when I arrived. Something I did not expect." "What changed?" she pressed. "Your empire has the power to protect billions of lives across the galaxy," he said. "But it is rotting from the inside. The noble houses grow fat on corruption, while the outer systems suffer. Conspiracies multiply in the shadows, and if nothing changes, this whole structure will collapse within a decade." He stepped closer to her, and she saw genuine passion burning in his gray eyes for the first time. "I came here to watch and protect," he continued, "but I stayed because I saw an opportunity to do something more, to help you build something better, to save an empire that could be a force for good instead of just another corrupt power." She asked. "They have been scheming for generations." For the first time since she had met him, Marcus smiled with real warmth, and the expression transformed his face from ordinary to almost handsome. "I already started 3 months ago, Your Majesty," he said. "Lord Malakar's alliance is crumbling as we speak, and he does not even know why. Key supporters have withdrawn, secret accounts have been frozen, witnesses have vanished, and his carefully laid plans are falling apart piece by piece." Seraphina stared at him with amazement and something that felt dangerously close to admiration. "You have been fighting a war in the shadows this entire time," she realized, "while everyone thought you were just a decorative ornament." "No exists," Marcus replied, "and the best victory is one your enemy does not realize they have suffered until it is far too late." The Queen laughed then, a genuine sound of delight that surprised them both, and she extended her hand to the human who had turned out to be so much more than anyone expected. "Then let us win this war together, Reaper One," she said, "and may the gods have mercy on anyone foolish enough to stand against us." Lord Vathor Malakar slammed his fist against the ancient wooden table, his scales flushing dark red with rage, as another report of failure arrived at his estate. "How is this possible?" he roared at his gathered advisors. "Our networks have operated in secret for 200 years, and now they crumble in a matter of months." His spymaster, a thin creature with nervous eyes, stepped forward with obvious reluctance. "My lord, we cannot identify the source of our problems," he admitted. "Bank accounts frozen without explanation. Witnesses disappearing before they can testify in our favor. Allies suddenly refusing our calls. It is as if we are fighting a ghost." Malakar thought of the human consort and the 3 dead assassins in the garden, and a cold suspicion began to form in his mind. "The human," he growled. "Somehow, that pathetic creature is behind this." "Impossible, my lord," another advisor protested. "He is just a decorative puppet, a political convenience, with no real power or ability." But Malakar remembered the security footage he had obtained through bribery, the way the human had moved with deadly precision, the calm efficiency with which he had ended 3 lives in less than a dozen heartbeats. "He is no ordinary human," Malakar decided, "and if we cannot defeat him in the shadows, then we will drag this war into the light where all can see." Within a week, Lord Malakar had convinced 5 noble houses to join his rebellion, using a combination of threats, bribes, and carefully crafted lies about the Queen being controlled by her alien consort. "The human has compromised Her Majesty's mind with forbidden technology," he declared in a broadcast that reached a dozen systems. "He is an infiltrator sent by Earth to dominate our glorious empire, and we must rise up to save our people from this alien menace." Civil war erupted across the empire, like fire spreading through dry grass. Malakar's forces struck at military installations and government facilities, catching the Queen's loyalists off guard with coordinated attacks that threw the empire into chaos. But Malakar made a critical error in his calculations. He assumed that the human would stay hidden behind the Queen's protection. Marcus Cole stepped out of the shadows and into the war. He did not lead armies or command fleets, for he had never needed such things to accomplish his missions. And instead, he became something far more terrifying: a one-man campaign of psychological destruction. The first strike came 3 days into the rebellion. Malakar's flagship, the dreadnought Crimson Vengeance, hung in orbit above his stronghold world, surrounded by a fleet of loyal warships and protected by the most advanced security systems credits could buy. Marcus appeared on the bridge at midnight, passing through security checkpoints that should have detected a fly. and he killed Malakar's 3 top admirals before anyone could raise an alarm. He left the bodies arranged in a careful pattern, and beside them he placed a simple note that contained only 7 words. "Surrender and your houses survive. Continue and I will end your bloodlines." The bridge crew found the bodies at dawn, and panic spread through the rebel fleet like a plague. How had one man penetrated the most secure ship in the sector? How had he killed 3 flag officers in their own command center? And if he could reach them once, could he not reach them again whenever he chose? The rebels thought the threat was a bluff, a desperate attempt to frighten them into submission. They were wrong. Within a week, Marcus had destroyed Malakar's secret supply depot by leaking its coordinates to a pirate fleet that had no love for the noblemen who had betrayed them years before. He broadcast intercepted communications that proved Malakar had been selling Valorian military secrets to the Kreth hegemony for decades, turning public opinion against the rebellion overnight. And in his most audacious move, he infiltrated House Dalvor's fortress and extracted a full confession from their matriarch, broadcasting her admission of treason across every channel in the empire, while her own guards stood helplessly outside her locked chamber. 3 of the 5 rebel houses surrendered within days, their leaders terrified of the invisible predator who seemed to be everywhere at once. The remaining 2 houses consolidated their forces around Malakar's fortress world, a heavily defended planet with 50,000 soldiers and orbital defense platforms that could destroy entire fleets. Queen Seraphina gathered her war council to plan a siege that would take months and cost millions of lives, her face grim as she studied the tactical displays. "There must be another way," she said. "I will not sacrifice so many of my people to crush this rebellion." Marcus stepped forward from his usual position in the shadows, and every eye in the room turned to him. "Give me 48 hours and a shuttle," he said. "I will end this." Admiral Kresh, the Queen's most senior military commander, shook his head in disbelief. "You cannot be serious," he protested. "That fortress has 50,000 soldiers, orbital defenses capable of destroying capital ships, and Lord Malakar himself, surrounded by an army of bodyguards." "I have faced worse odds with less motivation," Marcus replied calmly. "Those were just missions." He looked at the Queen, and something passed between them that made the entire War Council uncomfortable. "This is personal," he said softly. Seraphina wanted to refuse, wanted to keep him safe within the walls of her palace. But she saw the determination in his gray eyes, and knew that she could not stop him. Commanded, and come back alive. Marcus smiled that rare, genuine smile of his, and bowed his head. "As you wish, Your Majesty." The shuttle landed in a remote region of the fortress world at dusk, and Marcus Cole disappeared into the darkness like a shadow returning to its natural home. For 47 hours, the galaxy waited and wondered. Reports emerged from the fortress of strange happenings. Guards found dead at their posts with no sign of struggle. Communication systems failing at critical moments. Supplies mysteriously contaminated. And worst of all, the growing fear that something unstoppable was hunting through their ranks. Marcus did not fight an army of 50,000 soldiers. He fought their minds, their fears, their suspicions of each other. He planted evidence that commanders were planning to betray Malakar for their own safety, whispered lies that turned friend against friend, and created chaos that spread through their ranks. Garrison like a fever. On the second day, 3 regiments mutinied against their officers. On the second night, the commander of the orbital defenses was found dead in his quarters, his own security codes used to disable half the planetary shield grid. And when Malakar tried to flee in his personal ship, Marcus was waiting for him in the hangar. Their confrontation lasted less than a minute. Malakar was a nobleman who had never fought his own battles, while Marcus was a weapon forged in the deadliest program humanity had ever created. There was no contest at all. Exactly 47 hours after he had landed, Marcus walked out of the main gates of the fortress, carrying Lord Malakar's unconscious body over his shoulder. Behind him, the garrison had turned on itself completely. Soldiers who had been ready to die for their lord, now fighting each other over lies and fears that Marcus had planted in their hearts. The rebellion was over. Queen Seraphina's shuttle landed before him, and she emerged to see her consort standing alone amidst the chaos of a collapsed army. "You did it," she breathed, scarcely able to believe what she was seeing. Marcus dropped Malakar's body at her feet and swayed slightly, and for the first time she noticed the blood seeping through his robes and the pallor of exhaustion on his face. "Mission complete, Your Majesty," he said, and then his legs gave out beneath him. She caught him before he could fall and felt her heart clench with an emotion she had never expected to feel for a human. "Get the medical team," she screamed at her guards. "Get them now." And as she held him in her arms, she realized that somewhere along the way, Marcus Cole had become far more than a political convenience or a useful weapon. The rebellion collapsed completely within days of Lord Malakar's capture. The remaining rebel forces surrendered when they learned that their great leader had been taken by a single human operative, and the noble houses that had supported his cause scrambled to distance themselves from his disgrace. Lord Vathor Malakar was tried before the imperial court and found guilty of treason, conspiracy against the throne, and selling state secrets to foreign powers. And when the queen pronounced his sentence of death, not a single voice rose in his defense. The execution was swift and final, and with it ended 200 years of corruption that had festered at the heart of the empire. But Queen Seraphina did not attend the execution. Instead, she sat at the bedside of her human consort, in the palace medical wing, watching the machines that monitored his vital signs, and waiting for him to open his eyes. To losing him. 3 broken ribs, internal bleeding, a punctured lung, and dozens of smaller injuries that he had somehow hidden from everyone while walking out of that fortress. He should have collapsed within minutes of sustaining such wounds. But Marcus Cole had walked for miles, carrying an unconscious prisoner through enemy territory, because the mission demanded it. "You fool," Seraphina whispered as she held his hand. "You absolute fool. You could have died." The noble houses now trembled at the mere mention of her name, for they had seen what happened to those who challenged a queen protected by the ghost of Earth. Treaties were signed. Oaths of loyalty were sworn, and the empire enjoyed a stability it had not known for generations. The Kreth hegemony, robbed of their conspirator inside the Valorian court, and terrified of the Reaper who had once destroyed their entire war council, sent envoys begging for peace, flourished as never before, with trade agreements and cultural exchanges that benefited both species. Everything Seraphina had ever wanted for her empire was falling into place, and yet she could not enjoy any of it while Marcus lay unconscious in this sterile room. On the 7th day, his gray eyes finally opened. Seraphina leaned forward, her heart pounding with relief, and she squeezed his hand tighter than she intended. "You are awake," she said, her voice cracking with emotion she had never allowed anyone to see. "Thank the gods, you are finally awake." Marcus blinked slowly, orienting himself to his surroundings, and when he saw her face hovering above him, he smiled weakly. "The mission," he began. "Damn the mission," Seraphina interrupted fiercely, gripping his hand with both of hers now. "I do not care about missions or rebellions or political convenience. I care about whether you live or die. And when did that happen? When did I start caring so much?" For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The machines beeped softly in the background, and the sunlight streaming through the window painted golden patterns on the floor. Then Marcus reached up with his free hand and gently touched her face, his fingers tracing the elegant scales of her cheek with a tenderness that made her breath catch. "I do not know when it changed for me either, Seraphina," he said softly. using her name without her title for the first time. When I agreed to become your consort, it was just another mission, a way to serve and protect as I had always done. He paused, gathering his strength to continue. But somewhere along the way, I stopped protecting the Empire, he said, his gray eyes meeting her golden ones with an intensity that made her heart's race. I started protecting you. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she did not bother to hide them. I am a queen, she said. I am supposed to be above such emotions, untouched by sentiment, a ruler who makes decisions with cold logic and political calculation. And yet here you are, Marcus replied, sitting at the bedside of a broken human who has nothing to offer but himself. She laughed through her tears and leaned down to press her forehead against his. You foolish, wonderful, impossible human, she murmured. Do you truly not understand what you are offering? Tell me, he whispered. Everything, she said. You are offering me everything. 1 year later, the galaxy had transformed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Valorian Empire, united under Queen Seraphina and stabilized by her extraordinary consort, had become a beacon of progress and justice in a dangerous universe. The outer systems received aid and development that had been denied them for centuries. Corruption was rooted out at every level of government, and for the first time in memory, the common citizens of the Empire looked to their queen with genuine hope instead of resigned acceptance. Marcus Cole was no longer a secret weapon hidden in plain sight. His story had spread across the galaxy, growing with each retelling, until he had become something close to a myth. The human who had ended a civil war single-handedly. The ghost of Earth who had become the Queen's champion. The legend who had proven that humanity was far more than the young and insignificant species the galaxy had dismissed. But more importantly, he had become something he had never expected to be. A partner, a confidant, and if he was honest with himself, a man in love. He and Seraphina ruled together now, not as queen and decorative consort, but as true equals who complemented each other's strengths and covered each other's weaknesses. She brought the political acumen and imperial authority, while he brought the strategic brilliance and the steel that made their enemies tremble. Think twice before challenging them. During a state dinner celebrating the anniversary of the peace treaty with the Kreth hegemony, an ambassador from a minor species made the mistake of dismissing humanity in front of the Queen. With respect, Your Majesty, the ambassador said with a condescending smile, surely you must admit that choosing a human as your consort was a fortunate accident, for everyone knows that they are a young and insignificant race with nothing special to offer. The room fell silent, and everyone turned to see how the Queen would respond. Seraphina smiled coldly and rose from her throne, her golden eyes gleaming with dangerous light. Insignificant? She repeated, letting the word hang in the air like a blade. She glanced at Marcus, who stood silently at her side, with an expression that revealed nothing, his gray eyes calm and patient as always. Let me tell you something about humans, Ambassador, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the Great Hall. They are fragile compared to many species. Their bodies break more easily and heal more slowly than ours. They are short-lived, with barely a century to make their mark on the universe, and they come from a single unremarkable world on the edge of nowhere. She paused, letting her words sink in. And yet one of them ended a civil war that threatened to destroy my empire, killed the greatest assassins in the galaxy with his bare hands, toppled a conspiracy that had festered for 200 years, and taught an alien queen what it means to love. She stepped down from the dais and walked to Marcus, taking his hand in hers before the entire assembly. Never underestimate humanity, Ambassador, she said, her voice soft now, but no less powerful. I made that mistake once when I chose a human consort because I thought he would be meaningless and convenient. She raised Marcus's hand to her lips and pressed a kiss against his knuckles. I have never been happier to be wrong." The ambassador stammered apologies and bowed repeatedly, but Serafina paid him no more attention. She looked into the eyes of the man who had started as a political convenience and become the love of her life. "I think I am ready to retire from this dinner," she said quietly. "Will you accompany me?" Marcus smiled, that rare genuine expression that still had the power to make her heart skip. "Always, my queen," he replied. "Always." And as they walked out of the great hall together, hand in hand, the assembled dignitaries of 100 worlds watched in awe. For they had witnessed something that would be remembered for generations. The moment when a legend and a queen showed the galaxy what humans were truly capable of. Not conquest or destruction, though they excelled at both when necessary, but love, loyalty, and the unbreakable bonds that made even the mightiest empires stronger. That was the true lesson of Marcus Cole. That was the legacy of humanity. And that was why the galaxy would never underestimate them again.